1989, everybody wanted to work for Michael Milken. It was 1 or 2 years before he went to jail for all the junk bond trading. People were never interested in technology or Silicon Valley, except in 99, 2000, at the top of the dot-com mania when they all moved to Silicon Valley. 2005 to 07, it was all real estate and private equity. And so I do think there's some very odd dynamic like that.
So what mistakes are we in the tech world making now?
There are probably, well, there are many categories of mistakes that we're making. Certainly one broad category that flows from my monopoly thesis is that you often want to look at small markets. To be a monopoly, you have to get to a large market share. Go after small initial markets. Facebook initially went after the 10,000 people at Harvard. It went from 0 to 60% market share in 10 days, and that was a very auspicious start. And we sort of grew out to concentric circles. PayPal, our initial market was eBay power sellers. There were about 20,000 of them, and we got to about 30% market share within about 3 months. Again, a very good start. The opposite end of the spectrum. One of the big red flags in any presentation I get is where the first slide says we have a big market, and this was a mistake that all the clean tech companies in the last decade made, where the first slide was we're in the energy market. It's measured in hundreds of billions or trillions of dollars, and we are a tiny minnow in a vast ocean. And what that means is that you have to not just beat the other 9 thin film solar panel companies, but then you have to also beat the other 90 other types of solar panel companies, and then you have to beat the wind companies and the fracking companies, and then you have Chinese manufacturing come out of nowhere, and so you're sort of a minnow in a vast ocean, not what you want to be.
I think the phrase you use is most clean tech founders would have been better off opening a new vegan restaurant in Palo Alto. But you do, talking about...
They're both $1 trillion market. Restaurant market is also $1 trillion market.
But then it does come down to timing, because there's a lot of very effective clean tech businesses now. One of them is Solar City, Elon Musk's business, and his cousins, which you have invested in. And is it about choosing the timing?
Well, I think you have to get a number of things right. So I think you have to get the monopoly question right, you have to get the timing question right, you have to get, there's these, I think you want to have some secret that you understand that other people don't, you want to get the team right. So there are a whole set of these things that I think Tesla is a very impressive company that has worked incredibly well. And in some sense, they actually started with what was sort of a relatively small market. Electric sports cars were actually a smaller market than the energy market as a whole. It was still a pretty big market. It's still non-trivial to raise the roughly $500 million in capital it took, but it was about as it was a small market that was about as big as you could possibly be.
Transcend your next blend with the Braun Triforce Power Blender.
Elon Musk, the co-founder of PayPal, as well as producing very cool electric cars and solar panels, is sending space rockets up eventually to Mars.
Yes.
Just the space station in the short term. How do we get more Elon Musks?
It's always, I don't know if there's a simple formula for this. We had the PayPal business was actually quite successful in producing a series of these entrepreneurs. There have been about of the 220 people who were involved with PayPal in 2002 in Silicon Valley. There have been about $7 billion plus companies started by them. So it was Elon's Tesla and SpaceX. I was involved in starting Palantir. Friend Reid Hoffman started LinkedIn, YouTube, Yammer, Yelp, and so there's always this question: what was it about PayPal that was so conducive to this? And it's always hard to know, because whenever you have just like a sample size of one, it was one company, so it happened. It's always hard to really be too scientific about it. But one of the variables that I think may have been very important was that the lesson people learned inside PayPal was that it was hard but possible to build a great business. So we had a lot of ups and downs, a lot of challenges, but at the end it was a very successful exit to eBay. I think the lesson people learn in most of the companies they're involved in is very different. They're either in companies where things fail, and the lesson they learn is that it's impossible to build a great business. So if you work in a failed company, you will typically, the next time around, try to do something less ambitious. You may succeed, but it will be a lesser business because you will aim for something smaller. Or if you're in a super successful company where everything is seamlessly from day one, a Microsoft or a Google, you will learn the lesson that it's easy. And I think to build a great business, which I think is just as toxic as the lesson that it's impossible. And so I think most people end up finding themselves in contexts where they learn that it's easy or impossible to build great businesses. These are equally mistaken lessons. I think the intermediate one, and the intermediate mindset that it's hard but possible is a critical component to it.
Pretty much every major city around the world now is trying to become the local Silicon Valley. Consultants are making a fortune teaching innovation to governments. How reproducible is the success story of the Valley? You're in London now. We have a lot of very, very successful companies. Do you take London seriously as a tech center?
Well, I'm always skeptical of copying things. So I think just like you shouldn't try to copy Microsoft or Facebook, copying Silicon Valley is probably also the wrong idea. One reason it's the wrong idea is we don't even actually know what makes Silicon Valley work. Maybe it's the weather, maybe it's non-compete agreements are not enforced in California, maybe it is there are these crazy network effects, sort of all kinds of different explanations one can give. And so even if we wanted to, I'm not sure we know what makes it work. And then I think more fundamentally, when you're copying something, you already are setting yourself up to be defined in a lesser way. If you're the Oxford of Iceland, that's not quite Oxford. And so in a similar way, calling things, there's some way in which you don't want to define yourself in a way that's derivative. The something of somewhere is often the nothing of nowhere. I think instead what one should try to do is think really hard. What are the kinds of things that could be done, say, in London, better than anywhere else in the world? I think one of the things that and so I think, for example, we're investors in TransferWise, and I think it's doing great as a company. And I think there's perhaps a lot of innovation in the area of financial technology that could take place in London, because this is a finance center. It's a natural thing that London can do much better than Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley is not a global financial center. And London, I think, is also better than New York, by the way.
Shit, man.
In New York's very self-hating. People hate.
I can't believe I made myself, man.
In New York, in a way in which they don't hate it as much in London. So
What the?
Start a financial technology company in London.
Crazy.
This would be a cool thing to do. It would not be considered this cool thing to do in New York.
You invest, I think, in an artificial intelligence company.
And you have sort of eccentric British technologies that get developed too.
This is a company that Google bought for £400 million, and they haven't released a product.
So it was sort of a Manhattan project for AI. That was and remains the goal of DeepMind. So they assembled a phenomenally talented team, and I think so. I think there are things like that work quite well. But there's no reason that innovation in general has to happen only in Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley does have some advantages, but it probably also has disadvantages. The network effects that help Silicon Valley, I think, also in some cases probably lead to more lemming-like and crowd-like behavior, which I think is so problematic.
Do you worry about what artificial intelligence will do to us, to our ability to earn a living?
I'm of the view that strong AI is still quite a long ways off. If we ever were to get artificial intelligence, if we were ever to build computers that are as smart as human beings in every way, this would be a momentous event. This would be, it would be as significant as extraterrestrials landing on this planet. And if aliens landed, the first question would not be about the economy and what does it mean for your job. The first question would be political. Are they friendly? Are they unfriendly? And so, so I think to even frame it as a question about jobs is to understate the importance or seismic nature AI would represent. I think short of strong AI, however, I think people are way too worried about computers in this economic sense. I think we live in a society that's generally we live in a financial and a capitalistic age. I sort of argued elsewhere that I think we do not live in a scientific or technological age, and most people in the U.S., Western Europe, really don't like science. They don't like technology. They're biased against it in all sorts of ways. It's true of people. It's true of the politicians. It's true of the governments. It's true of the culture. The easy way to see this is you just look at all the Hollywood movies that basically show technology that doesn't work, that kills people, it's destructive. You can choose whether it's Matrix or Terminator or Avatar or Elysium. I watched the Gravity movie the other day. And you'd never want to go to Mars, even to outer space. You'd be much happier being back on some muddy island somewhere on this world. And that reflects the sensibility of most people that the future is something to be feared and that we should try to prevent. And that's why I think people who are involved in the scientific or technological world are the counterculture in our society today. And it is a sort of very unusual perspective to think that the future is something to hope for. So, roundabout answer. So I think this idea that today's computers are replacing people is just another one of these technological angst narratives we have. I think it's not true. I think computers and people are fundamentally different. They're good at really different things. They're fundamentally complementary, not substitutes. The much bigger challenge for the middle class in the developed world comes from globalization, because people in India, people in China are actually not that different from us. They can substitute for our labor, and that's where the substitution is taking place. I don't think we should stop globalization, but we should. It has some problematic aspects. I think technology has far fewer.
You also think that technology can help fight aging. How much can we solve this problem in our lifetime?
Well, we've made a lot of progress over the last 150 years. The maximum life expectancy in 1840 was 46 years among Swedish women. Today it's something like 87, 88 years. Life expectancy has gone up by about 2.5 years a decade. So every day that you survive, your life expectancy goes up by 5 or 6 hours. I think that, and so there's always been this debate between the mathematicians who sort of extrapolated these curves and the biologists who always argued that you weren't going to make any more progress, you're about to hit the wall. And I would tend to side with the mathematicians over the biologists, and I think we can do a lot more. I don't think we're going to solve, we're going to find sort of a single magic pill that makes people live forever. I think there will be a lot of specific blocking and tackling, but I think we can make a lot of progress on cancer. I think there's no reason that we could not cure Alzheimer's or dementia. 1 out of 3 people at age 85 has dementia. I think we could be doing a lot more, and it's really it's always, again, I think it's outrageous that our culture is so complacent about these things, and I think there's room for a lot of progress in these areas.
So when you hear of supporters of the singularity, people like Ray Kurzweil talking about being able to defeat aging, the body can live forever, what do you think?
Well, I think it's I think this has been a core animating idea of the entire modern scientific project. The search for the water of life that the alchemists had was as great as for the thing that would transmute everything into gold. They were actually, the alchemists were more interested in living forever than in finding the thing that substituted everything for gold. It was Francis Bacon, the New Atlantis. So this is the whole project of modern science, and so it's hard to know how much we can change the world from a place where life is nasty, brutish, and short. But I think the moral thing is to is to push it as far as we possibly can in the other direction. You know, I know there are all sorts of arguments on the other side. People say that, you know, death is a natural part of life, to which I always respond that I think it is at least as natural for us to be fighting death. And I think that, you know, we have this modality where we are either accept it or deny it. And so I think most people are sort of in a schizophrenic mode where they accept death and deny it at the same time. And what acceptance and denial, however, have in common is they're both modes of thinking that stop you from doing anything. It's going to happen, or there's nothing you can do about it. It's not going to happen, or it's going to happen, and there's nothing you can do about it. Both of those modes tell you that you shouldn't do anything. And I think we should be spending more time fighting.
I'm quite upset that we're not having an argument, actually. I feel I'm missing out on the peace deal experience. You're not shouting me down.
Yeah.
You're a man with
I never shout people down.
You're a man with political views. You have strong views about education and other things. Let me just imagine with you that you're suddenly in the White House.
It's not going to happen.
Let's just imagine.
What's on your list? I always think fictional thought experiments are very treacherous things, though.
But let's just say you could change the rules.
Does it mean I'm mayor of the United States, I'm kissing babies all day long?
Well, what would you like to change?
These are all, how far can we play this thought experiment?
Yeah.
What would you want to change in how
You hear me?
run?
Well,
Metaverse.
you know, my single issue is that we have to make more progress in science and technology, and you know, I don't think the government can do that much on this because it's so hostile to these things. It reflects a population that's hostile. At best, we can hope that the government gets out of the way of stopping this sort of progress. There was a time in the past when the government was able to coordinate things and do things. I don't think we're living in that sort of a society anymore. You know, the U.S. was able to build a nuclear bomb in 3.5 years in a project organized by the government, or you could put someone on the moon in the Apollo program in the 1960s. These sorts of things would be utterly inconceivable today. You know, a letter from Einstein to the White House would get lost in the mailroom. People say, you know, who is this crazy scientist who thinks you can do this this completely different sort of a thing? And so I think the best role for government in our world is somewhat more limited because, you know, I looked at this the other day. There are 535 congressmen and senators in the U.S. and by a generous count, maybe 35 of them have a background in science or engineering, and the rest of them are like in the Middle Ages. They don't know that solar panels don't work at night or windmills don't work when the wind is not blowing, and so I think we can't have that great a hope for how much innovation can happen from government if that's how it's constant. Now again, if we could change everybody in the government, that we're again playing with a very crazy thought experiment, though.
Governments are trying to map the brain, though. Obama's got a big project. The Europeans have a big project.
Look, there's a lot of funding that goes to various kinds of ideas, but the politicization of the funding, I think, has often had this counterproductive effect. You know, in much of science, I worry that there's been a sort of Gresham's law at work, where the people who are nimble in the art of writing grant applications to governments have replaced the eccentric people who are the truly great scientists. And so the eccentric university professor is a species that I think is going extinct very fast because of the sort of Gresham's law dynamics. Yes, there's a lot of money going to projects. The projects that get funded are consensus projects. The experiments that get done are experiments that everybody thinks will work, and experiments that everyone thinks will work are ones that I think rarely advance science at all. The interesting experiments are ones that no one thinks work and that actually end up working, but those are very hard to find politically.
So you've been backing a seasteading organization to try and create a new kind of nation. How's that going?
That still has a long ways to go. It's a small project I got involved in. It always generates enormous interest because I think people do have a sense that the frontier is somewhat closed and there's something odd and that there's no longer a place you can go to in this world where you can start a new community or a new society. And so even talking about doing something as speculative as building communities on platforms on the ocean naturally generates an enormous amount of conversation. I think figuring out ways to reopen the frontier is very important. It's not clear we can do it geographically because the land surface is fully covered. Outer space is still pretty far away. But I think the frontier is this place where new things happen. There's sort of a certain logic to California being the place where so much innovation happened. It was the place where the geographical frontier ended. You went west to go to the frontier ended in California, and even though it's geographically, we are finished exploring it, it is still a place where a lot of new things happen.
So on the Founders Fund website, you famously say that we wanted flying cars, instead we got 140 characters. What have you got against Twitter?
Well, you have to always put this in some context. So I think that I think that Twitter has a great business model. It's in some ways such a good business model that and when you have a monopoly like Twitter has on the service they built out, you often don't have to run your business in quite as operationally tight a way as you would if you were, say, opening a restaurant or something like that. So I think Twitter is a great business, but there is always a sense that it's not enough to take our civilization to the next level. And this is always sort of the idea that we need to do things not just in the world of bits. We should also be trying to do more things in the world of atoms. The narratives we always tell in our media are ones of specific failure linked to general failure, or specific success linked to general success. And so it would be, Twitter is a great business, and therefore look at how much is happening in technology. And I think we need to consider that it's a specific success that's perhaps obscuring a lot of general failures. The cell phones that distract us from our surroundings also distract us from the fact that our surroundings are strangely old, that we live in these old cities where transportation systems are maybe from the 19th or early 20th century, where a lot of stuff has not changed in a very long time. And so yes, I think Twitter itself is a great company. It's not enough to take us to the next level. Now, it often gets framed as a critique of the Twitter founders. Why couldn't they have built something like flying cars? And I think that's very unfair, because they did build a great company, and we shouldn't blame them. The blame is on all of us for not working on these other things.
There is a startup in Slovakia that we just featured in Wire called Aeromobile that is making a flying car. What do you think when you see Uber valued at $17 billion, WhatsApp bought for $19 billion, and Snapchat worth somewhere above $10 billion? What do you think about the valuation?
Well, there is sort of always this recurrent question whether we have a bubble in technology like we had in